Imagine a rare moment in modern life. You turn off your phone, close the door to your room, and all the sounds of the outside world gradually disappear. There are no more flashing notifications, no more loud conversations, no more streams of news constantly running across a screen. There is only you and the silence. For many people, this silence quickly becomes uncomfortable, like an empty space that needs to be filled immediately. But for some others, it is where they feel most clear about themselves. This is the world of independent introverts, people who are not afraid to be alone because they have learned how to turn stillness into inner strength. In this video, we will explore the psychology behind independent introverts, why they do not depend on the noise of society, why they can live very steadily without needing too much recognition from others, and what makes them sometimes misunderstood as cold or distant. If you have ever felt different, if you feel that your energy is restored in quiet moments, then this video may say exactly what you have always thought, but have never put into words. And before we go deeper, take a second to subscribe to the channel and watch the video until the end, because the later part of this video may change the way you see silence, independence, and even yourself. There is a very common misunderstanding about people who like to be alone. Many assume that they are avoiding the world, that they withdraw because they lack social skills or because they are afraid of relationships. But modern psychology shows a different and much deeper perspective. For many independent introverts, solitude is not a place to escape. It is where they recharge their energy, organize their thoughts, and build inner stability. To understand this, we need to look at how humans process mental energy. Every conversation, every social meeting, every small interaction during the day consumes a portion of our attention and emotions. For extroverts, these interactions are like fuel. They feel excited and energized when they are among many people. But for introverts, too much social stimulation can feel like constant noise in the mind. It is not necessarily negative, but it quickly drains their energy. So when they choose to be alone, they are not withdrawing from life at all. They are simply returning to their natural state of balance. Imagine the mind like a room with many windows opening to the outside world. Throughout the day, these windows are constantly opened. Information, emotions, other people's opinions, work responsibilities, social expectations, all of these enter that room. If the windows are never closed, the room will become chaotic. Silence is the moment when those windows close so the mind can organize everything again. For independent introverts, this moment is not frightening. On the contrary, it is extremely necessary. In the quiet, they begin to do something that many people rarely have the chance to do: think deeply. The experiences of the day are reviewed. Complex emotions become clearer. New ideas form from connections that had not previously been noticed. This is also why many scientists, artists, and philosophers throughout history often spent a great deal of time alone. Not because they hated people, but because they needed mental space to think beyond the immediate reactions of life. When there is no constant stimulation from the outside, the brain begins to shift into a different mode of operation. Attention is no longer pulled outward by surrounding events. Instead, it turns inward. In this state, imagination becomes stronger. The ability to connect information becomes more flexible, and abstract thinking has more space to grow. That is why many of the most creative ideas often appear in very ordinary moments. When you are walking alone, when you are sitting quietly in a room, or when you are looking out the window doing nothing at all. Those moments may look like doing nothing, but in reality, the mind is doing a great deal of work. Another interesting point is that people who are comfortable with solitude often develop very strong emotional self-regulation. When you regularly spend time alone, you are forced to face your own thoughts. You cannot constantly distract yourself with conversations or phone screens. This may not feel comfortable at first, but over time it creates an important psychological skill, the ability to understand yourself. You begin to recognize what makes you feel stressed. You recognize what truly matters to you. You recognize when you need rest and when you need to take action. In other words, solitude helps build a very special relationship, the relationship with yourself. And this is something that many people in modern society unintentionally miss. When we are always surrounded by sound information and constant connection, we rarely have the chance to listen to our deepest thoughts. We react to the world so quickly that sometimes we do not even understand what we truly feel. Independent introverts live a little differently. They often have a gap between stimulus and response. That gap allows them to think before acting, observe before judging, and understand before reacting. This does not mean they are always right or always calm, but it often gives them a kind of psychological stability that others may find difficult to understand. So, when you see someone spending a lot of time alone, it does not necessarily mean they are lonely. They may be reading, thinking, imagining, or simply enjoying the silence that their mind needs to function at its best. In an increasingly noisy world, the ability to sit quietly with your own thoughts truly becomes a rare skill. And the paradox is this: the more comfortable a person is being alone, the more free they often are when they are with others, because they do not need other people to fill the emptiness inside. They enter relationships not from a place of lack, but from a place of fullness. They do not look for others to complete them. They seek connection because they genuinely want to share their life. And that may be the quiet psychological strength of independent introverts, a strength that is often misunderstood, yet extremely valuable in a world that rarely pauses long enough to listen to itself. When silence lasts long enough, a subtle but very important change begins to occur in the way the mind operates. At first, thoughts may still feel scattered: fragments of a conversation from the afternoon, an unfinished task, a sentence someone said still echoing in your mind. But gradually, when there are no notifications, no voices, and no pressure to respond immediately, those fragments begin to find their own places. What once confused you in the morning suddenly becomes clearer in the evening. A question that once seemed to have no answer slowly begins to reveal new possibilities. In moments like this, you realize that thinking is not only a reaction to the world, it is also a process of exploration. That is why many people with a rich inner life often experience a kind of quiet dialogue with themselves. They do not only think, they also observe their thoughts. An idea appears, and then another part of the mind begins to question it. A memory surfaces, and immediately afterward comes a reflection on the meaning of that memory. This process is like an internal conversation that never truly ends. From the outside, it may look like prolonged silence, but inside it is a continuous flow of awareness. One interesting characteristic of this kind of thinking is the ability to revisit experiences over time. Many people may forget a conversation after just a few days. But for those who are used to reflecting, a simple exchange can sometimes continue to live in their minds many years later. Not because they cannot let go, but because their minds naturally return to those moments to understand them more deeply. They remember a facial expression, a brief pause in someone's speech, a sentence that seemed ordinary but contained more layers of meaning than they realized at the beginning. Over time, their perspective on that event changes, and with it comes a deeper understanding of people. This slow and careful analysis often makes people with a rich inner life very perceptive observers. They notice details that others might overlook: a subtle change in a friend's voice, a passing glance when someone mentions a sensitive topic, or the atmosphere in a room shifting even though no one says anything. These small signals are often not processed immediately during a conversation, but when they return to silence, the mind begins to connect the details, and the larger picture gradually appears. This is also related to another ability: a strongly developed imagination. When a mind is used to exploring its own thoughts, it easily moves into hypothetical scenarios. A simple question like, "What would happen if?" can open countless possibilities. The mind begins to construct situations, test different choices, and imagine different outcomes. This process is not merely daydreaming, it is a form of mental simulation. Before an action happens in reality, it has already been explored many times in the space of thought. That is why many independent introverts often tend to think strategically or creatively. When you spend enough time in your inner world, you begin to recognize patterns that were previously unclear. Experiences that once seemed unrelated, a book you read, a film you watched, a conversation you overheard, suddenly connect into a new idea. It is like pieces from many different puzzles unexpectedly forming a completely new image. However, this very depth of thought sometimes creates a paradox in social life. When the mind is used to operating on multiple layers of ideas at once, simple interactions can sometimes feel slightly slow or repetitive. It is not because those conversations are unimportant, but because they rarely activate the full cognitive potential of someone who thinks deeply. In those moments, one part of the mind may still be reflecting on other things, an unfinished idea, a philosophical question, or a plan for the future. As a result, after a long period of continuous social interaction, they may feel a particular kind of fatigue. It is not a dislike of people, but a need to return to their own mental space to rebalance. When they have the opportunity to return to silence, the first thing that often happens is not complete rest, but the restart of their inner stream of thought. Ideas that were previously paused begin to continue developing, like a story that was left unfinished. And it is precisely in these quiet spaces that many small breakthroughs in thinking appear. A problem that once seemed confusing is suddenly seen from a different angle. A difficult decision becomes clearer, or sometimes a completely new idea appears that had never been considered before. This explains why many people find their most creative moments when they are not trying to be creative, when they are walking alone, when they are looking out a window, or when they are simply sitting quietly in silence. These moments remind us of a simple truth that is often forgotten in modern life. The human mind does not only develop through constant activity, but also through pauses. When external stimulation decreases, the brain has the opportunity to reorganize information, connect experiences, and create new insights. Silence, therefore, is not the absence of activity. It is the space where the most subtle activities of the mind can take place. And perhaps that is why people who are truly comfortable being alone rarely see solitude as an empty space that needs to be filled. For them, it is an environment, a place where thoughts can grow freely, where imagination can expand, and where a person can meet themselves again without any noise from the world interfering. When the mind is no longer pulled by the constant signals from the outside world, another ability begins to appear: the ability to understand one's own experiences more deeply. In long enough silence, people begin to see hidden patterns in their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Reactions that once happened unconsciously gradually become clearer. You begin to realize why a small remark makes you uncomfortable, why a familiar situation always makes you anxious, or why some people bring a sense of peace while others leave you feeling exhausted. This awareness rarely appears in the middle of noise and hurry. It needs space, and solitude is that space. One of the deepest benefits of spending time alone is the ability to develop self-understanding. When people are constantly busy with work, social media, and conversations, they often only react to life without truly reflecting on it. But when there is quiet space, the mind begins to ask different questions. What truly matters to me? What is merely habit or pressure from others? These questions do not have immediate answers, but they gradually shape the way a person understands themselves. This reflective process is what helps many independent introverts develop a very unique form of inner stability. They tend to be less easily carried away by the constant shifts of public opinion or social pressure, not because they deliberately resist society, but because they have spent a great deal of time thinking about their own values and priorities. When a person clearly understands what truly matters to them, they need far less constant validation from the outside. This also explains why many people feel that time alone helps them recover their energy. During these periods, the mind does not have to constantly adapt to the expectations of others. There is no need to respond immediately, no need to turn every thought into spoken words. Instead, awareness can slow down. Thoughts are processed at their natural rhythm. Another interesting aspect of solitude is that it creates the conditions for emotional growth. When people are always surrounded by others, they often try to avoid uncomfortable emotions by distracting themselves. A new conversation, a short video, or a phone notification can temporarily cover feelings of sadness or anxiety. But when you are alone long enough, those emotions cannot be ignored. They need to be acknowledged and understood. At first, this may not feel comfortable, but over time, it helps develop an important skill: the ability to stay with your own emotions without being controlled by them. Instead of reacting immediately to every feeling, you begin to observe them. You realize that emotions often come and go, like small waves in the mind. This understanding brings a kind of calm that many people seek but rarely reach in busy lives. Solitude also helps nurture another ability that is rarely mentioned: the ability to pay deep attention. When someone becomes accustomed to spending time in quiet, they often develop the ability to focus longer on an idea, a book, or a complex problem. In a world where attention is constantly fragmented into moments of just a few seconds, the ability to maintain focus becomes a rare advantage. When attention lasts long enough, the quality of thinking also changes. Questions that initially seem simple gradually become deeper. An idea that begins as something vague has time to grow into a complete concept. Many intellectual and creative discoveries throughout history have appeared in this way, not from constant busyness, but from long periods of quiet thought. What is important to understand is that people who value solitude do not necessarily want to live separated from the world. In fact, many of them deeply value meaningful relationships. But the way they approach relationships is often a little different. Instead of seeking constant interaction, they tend to seek genuine connection. A deep conversation that lasts for hours may bring far more value to them than many brief social encounters. This difference sometimes causes them to be misunderstood. In a culture that values constant activity and communication, a person's need for time alone can be interpreted as distance. But in reality, that need is often simply a way to maintain psychological balance. Just as the body needs rest after activity, the mind also needs quiet spaces to recover and think. When the balance between connection and solitude is maintained, something interesting happens. People who are comfortable with silence often enter relationships with a fuller sense of presence because they do not rely entirely on others to fill the empty space in their minds. They bring their rich inner world into conversations, and that often makes those exchanges deeper and more sincere. So, from a psychological perspective, the ability to feel comfortable being alone is not a sign of social isolation. On the contrary, it often reflects a form of cognitive and emotional maturity. It shows that a person can find meaning not only from the outside world, but also from their own stream of thoughts and inner experiences. In an era where noise and distractions seem to be constantly increasing, the ability to step back, sit quietly, and think deeply becomes an increasingly rare skill. And like many other rare skills, its value is often only recognized when we truly experience the power of silence.